because we have to free this room by 5:30, and we have quite an agenda with us. So, my name is Vidya Samarasinha, and I've been organizing this with the help of a lot of other people, and I'll come to that later. I'd like to welcome you very warmly to this event for Christine's new book, Cosmopolitan Sex Work. You can see some of the copies there. While indeed our focus this afternoon is on the book, this wonderful book, we also like to take this opportunity to really showcase the SIS gender IR research and the scholars that this SIS has produced. And it's a type of opportunity to showcase the SIS as not only a type of what you can call the incubator, but also as the hub of gender IR research. And we have with us today two PhDs from the SIS, our keynote speaker, Dr. Spike Peterson. I will be introducing her later. And of course, the author of the book, Dr. Christine Chin, who is also one of our SIS PhDs. And of course, among us, there are in the audience, there are quite a few of the SIS PhDs, and you will get to know them a little later, perhaps. And also with us today is Dr. Anne Tickner, who is the scholar in residence at the SIS, and she's also the past president of this International Studies Association, our foremost academic association. And she is one of the preeminent feminist scholars in IR. And in fact, we have got these three wonderful people on the same platform. And although at the risk of, type of mixing my metaphors, I think we have got three ducks on a row. I'm also, although there's our thank yous are later on, I'm doing it later on, but for the moment, I'm also grateful to the SIS Alumni Association for supporting this event with a contribution, and I'm especially grateful to our Dean, Jim Goldgeier, for in fact making this event possible. So thank you, and I would like to invite Jim to say a few words. Jim?
Well, thank you, Vidya, and thank you so much for your leadership in organizing this event, your leadership more generally of the International Development Program. I'm going to let Professor Samarasinha introduce the speakers in more detail, but I just wanted to offer a couple comments. First of all, of course, welcome to SIS. For those of you who are coming in from outside, just delighted to be able to put on an event like this. My congratulations, of course, to Professor Chin. For any of you who've read the President's strategic plan for American University, you will know, and if you haven't read it, you're going to know in a second, that the plank number one of President Kirwan's strategic plan is to promote the scholar-teacher ideal. And so we are here to celebrate someone who embodies the scholar-teacher ideal, and that is Professor Christine Chin, who is both an amazing teacher and an amazing scholar. We're thrilled that she has produced this book, and I'm particularly thrilled because I've been feeling guilty because of all the administrative work that she's had in the school, that would slow her progress down, but fortunately it did not get too much in the way, and she was able to complete this book, which is a real achievement. But I do also want to note how grateful I am to her for all the other work that she does in the school, and especially her leadership over the last couple of years of the international communications program that we have at the master's level. I don't want to cut into the introductions of our other two invited guests, but just to say that it would be easy just to say that they are preeminent scholars of feminist issues in IR, gender in IR, but they really are preeminent scholars in IR. They don't really need any of the adjectives before that. And so I just want to congratulate them on all that they've achieved, and also just how proud I am that we we are able to have them in our SIS community. Professor Tickner is a recent addition to the school after having an incredibly distinguished career elsewhere, and most recently 15 years at the University of Southern California, and as was mentioned previously, past president of the International Studies Association and a real pioneer in the international relations field. And having her here now as a distinguished scholar in residence is just an incredible honor for us as a school, and we're just really pleased to be able to play a role in helping to support her continued scholarship going forward. And then to have such a distinguished alumna as Spike Peterson from the University of Arizona to come back to SIS, to see the new building, to see the new PhD space that wasn't here when she was a PhD student in the program. It's really a wonderful opportunity for us to show off what we're doing, but also, again, to be in the glow of having one of our PhD alums achieve so much in the field of international relations. And as Vidya was saying, to be able to have two of our PhD alums who've achieved so much on the same panel is really a great privilege for us to be able to acknowledge and to be able to have this kind of event. So again, Vidya, thank you for all you've done to organize this and turn this whole event back over to you.
Thank you, Jim. And now I would like to turn the platform to Anne Tickner. She's here with us because she's a scholar in residence, and I don't have to go into detail because, in fact, Jim also talked about her credentials in a way. So she would like to speak a few words to you in terms of some of the issues that she will bring up in terms of Christine's book, as well as gender in IR.
There are seats up here.
Yeah.
More seats in the front.
You could stay here. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Well, it's a wonderful privilege to be here. And first, I'd like to thank Vidya and all the other people who were so important on putting on this wonderful event, and also to Dean Goldar for supporting the event. It's wonderful to see so many people here, and a privilege to be able to celebrate with all of you Christine Chin's wonderful book, about which I will say a bit more in a few minutes, but just right at the beginning, congratulations, Christine. It was a fantastic piece of work, as you will see for those of you who haven't yet read it. It's also very exciting, as we've mentioned before, to have Spike Peterson back here to celebrate Christine's book. Spike and I go way back. She is one of the, I don't know whether she would want to be claimed as a founding mother of feminist IR, but some of us do sometimes use that term. Is that okay?
Founder is fine.
Okay. That's what I thought. I made my first mistake, which I will do a lot of in front of Spike. I will now just say how I first met Spike, and she may not remember this, although this is perhaps a more empowering story than what I just said about her being a mother. But in the late 1980s, when this field was pretty non-existent and pretty tough for those of us who were trying to say something, I remember being on a panel at a professional meeting, and I was trying to say something about gender and feminism and IR, and here was his audience looking sort of startled and mystified, and suddenly I saw this face in the front row lit up, clearly comprehending everything I was talking about and making some super profound comment about it. And I was so impressed. I went up to her afterwards, and indeed it was Spike. I don't know whether you remember that, but I actually can't remember where it was, but I was so thrilled, you know. He is somebody who actually gets what I'm talking about, you know, so that was wonderful. I subsequently, one of the first moves we made in Feminist IR was to try to work collaboratively, and I was a co-organizer of a conference that was held at Wellesley College in 1990. And Spike was not only present at that workshop, but she edited the books Gendered States, which some of you may be familiar with, that actually came out of that conference. So that was really the beginning of a long and fruitful and wonderfully collaborative friendship that we have maintained since. But as you've already heard, perhaps one of the more significant reason for having Spike here is that she is indeed an AU alum, and I wanted to emphasize that again because it is really quite remarkable how many of the first generation feminist IR scholars are indeed PhDs from this institution, in addition to Spike and Christine, Anne Runyon, and Lisa Prugel. So really this is kind of, you know, in some sense, the place where it all started. So it's a particularly compatible home for me now to be back here in this kind of circle. It's wonderful. Now, the first conference that I mentioned that was held at Wellesley College was funded by the Ford Foundation, which had kind of an important role in getting us started. And 10 years later, in the year 2000, the Ford Foundation came back to some of us and asked some of us to do another conference 10 years later to kind of assess how the field was doing. And at that time, Ford insisted that we include policymakers, those working in non-governmental organizations and activists, which we did. And I wanted to stress that because these communities have always been an important part of feminism, which of course was born first out of the social movements of the 1960s and the 1970s. And feminism has always talked about the interrelationship of theory and practice, and the notion that kind of theory emerges from practice. I say this because I know that there are quite a number of people here today from the policy and the NGO communities. And certainly since coming to DC, somewhat new to DC, I'm beginning to learn how central gender issues have become in these other worlds. And I worry sometimes that the academy is falling behind. At most of our universities, we are not training students in how to become gender experts. These sort of courses are few and far between. So to this end, I wanted to say something that Christine and I have just begun to talk about, and that is the possibility of launching a kind of global gender initiative here at SIS, making SIS a hub for gender research, policy, and training. We see if we manage to... So we've got to do it, you see. I mean, we see this initiative as really building on all the existing expertise that's already here, both at SIS and in the broader AU community, as well as on the very extensive alumni network in the academy, in non-governmental and in governmental organizations in this area. So, you know, stay tuned for this. So just to turn very briefly to the book, which you'll hear about in more detail. Like all Christine's work, and I've used her work a lot in my courses and my own research, Cosmopolitan Sex Workers takes an unconventional look at an issue about which much has been said, but not in the innovative way that Christine's book does. There is little work on non-trafficked sex workers, and none that has spoken in such detail and with such nuance about these women's lives. Christine offers us a careful and exhaustive study of the lives of non-trafficked sex workers and the shadowy world of the syndicates that employ them. And I hope that in her remarks she will say something about how she actually garnered access and went about doing this research. This study is rich in detail, bringing the lives of those who IR does not normally consider worth studying into view. But at the same time, it is a sophisticated analysis of the economic restructuring processes that are reshaping the global economy. Christine weaves a compelling and fascinating story in with theoretical concerns of political economists to produce a book accessible and of importance to those outside as well as inside the academy. I just wanted to end by saying that Christine's book is part of a series entitled Oxford Studies in Gender and International Relations. That it's a new series edited by Laura Schoberg of the University of Florida and myself. We're also very fortunate to have here today to join this celebration Angela Chapko, who is the in-house Oxford Press editor for this series. And Angela, maybe you could sort of wave. Did you bring some of the other books with you? Oh, you didn't. Okay, because this is really quite amazing. Angela has certainly been the best press editor with whom I have worked, and mainly thanks to Angela and to Laura, who people know her here, know she has sort of superhuman energy. We have moved excellent and varied books with remarkable speed with this series. I look back, the first one actually has a 2012 publication date. I can't believe that because I think there are 6 already out and 2 in the late stages of production, which is quite extraordinary. They're a very varied set. They are all on broadly defined gender and international relations, and so I hope you know that they're listed inside Christine's book too. I mean, Christine's book is a wonderful latest edition, but it is also a very good series. We have managed to get a mix of senior and junior scholars, and this has given some younger scholars that we have sought out the chance to publish in a top university press, which is very important when you're starting your career. So with that, I'll end and turn it over to the more substantive comments and focus on Christine's book.
Thank you very much, Anne, as usual, giving us the context and looking out at the future. Now it is my pleasure, and of course it's also my honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Spike Peterson. We can claim her as one of our own because, as I said earlier, she got her PhD from SIS and in a PhD in International Relations. And she has been widely recognized as a great IR scholar with a gender focus. Dr. Peterson has been a professor in the School of Government and Public Policy in the University of Arizona since 2009. From 2004 to 2009, she was the professor of political science in the same institution. In fact, she was first recruited to the institution to bring gender into the discourse. And neither she nor the institution has looked back from that ever since. In fact, Spike's list of scholarly contributions are so lengthy that listing them would take up perhaps a large segment of your time, and you don't want to listen to that. And so that what you could do is let me only highlight the major contributions so that you could get a sense of her diverse achievements and what she is as a scholar. The book she wrote with Anne Sisson-Runyon, another SIS PhD, Global Gender Issues, is a must-read textbook to all those who work on gender issues in politics and in IR. It has been reprinted and revised many times in order to keep up with the changing nature and the structure of the subject. First published in 1983, I think the latest print is 2010. And in between, there had been at least 3 other printing, revised, updated, and published. Besides her edited books and her single-author book, she has a long list of scholarly contributions as journal articles and book chapters. She is in the editorial board of almost every well-known feminist journal and a reviewer of all the major scholarly book publishing houses. So let's get to know her better. Spike's work has been recognized well beyond the US. She has been invited as a visiting professor to many leading universities outside the US. In England, for instance, she has been in the University of Bristol, the London School of Economics, and if I'm not mistaken, she will be in the University of Durham in 2014. Okay. And I believe, she has been in the visiting professor at the National University, Australian National University in Canberra, and in Sweden. So she has got around. This as a scholar, but as a young person, she has backpacked for nearly 1 decade. So she has got around. And a scholar, I believe, has really arrived when her scholarship is celebrated in the academic sessions of her subject. And for IR scholars, ISA is that venue. And Spike has joined this elite crowd as well. She was honored as an eminent scholar in a panel in 2004. And also as an author meets critic panel where, of course, she was the author. So these are real honors that, an eminent scholar gets from the peers. So here we have Spike. In all the work she does, her relentless pursuit of and success in bringing gender into IR discourse is remarkable. Now, if I try to capture the essence of her wonderful contribution to IR, I can only say gender matters. Spike.
No, I think I'll sit here. Okay, in part because I can't read my notes from that distance. Okay. Well, it would take more time than I have to thank everyone for enabling this event, for being so kind and generous to me, for so many people that it's a real treat to see either for the first time or after many years or from many different contexts. And I appreciate the former faculty, the friends, the new friends, the graduate students who are here. It's really a treat. And it really is a transformed space. You should look at, do you have pictures anywhere on the walls of what it used to be like? Yeah, well, there's a reason for that. All right, yeah. At any rate. What I want to do and kind of been asked to do is to lend some contextualization for Christine's fabulous book, which I highly recommend. I have read it cover to cover. It's yet again another really rigorous piece of research that is similar to what she has done in the past and I'm sure will continue to do in the future. I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. But my project here is to provide some contextualization of feminist international relations and then locate Christine's book in that. And I have chosen to do that by referencing something that Marisha Shalevsky brought up a decade ago, possibly, as a trope in regard to feminism and IR, and how it is both the cutting edge of international relations scholarship and theory and practice, and cut, as in marginalized by the mainstream, cut out of the mainstream simultaneously. And how do we make sense of that? Okay? So I will conclude also with what do we do about it? Right? Anne has mentioned some of the things about the development of feminist international relations, which quite frankly was just a bloody slog. Right? Much as I am grateful for SIS enabling my graduation and various individuals enabling my graduation and my future career, as in any critical resistance, social transformation movement or effort, the challenges are much greater than they are even just to get a PhD, right, which is already a very demanding and challenging task, as so many of you in the room know. Right? So being engaged in something that involves basically challenging the fundamentals of the field you're entering and pretending to know something about, yes, it wasn't welcomed. So, back to my notes. So I'll try to keep to time. So, in what sense can I claim that feminist international relations constitutes a cutting edge of scholarship and practice? I'd say that it's important, I thought Anne might say this, but now I have I want to insert this, that should you not be familiar with contemporary feminist theory, especially in the academy, it is no longer, and I'm not persuaded it ever has been, an issue of just promoting females over males, as in reversing some hierarchy. It's never actually just simply been about male-female relations. It has been about struggling to figure out who are these females and who are these males, what is that relationship, and very quickly developed into questions of, oh, this has gotten so much more complicated than we thought to begin with, right? And that it's not just about body parts, this is the way I talk to my students. It's not just about body parts, right? It's about all that baggage in our heads that's a lot more difficult to measure, to make visible, to become conscious of, right? Because it's not necessarily conscious. But that baggage in our heads, the ideas that we have, the stereotypes we carry around, our cultural socialization, that kind of conceptual apparatus that we live and use necessarily, right, is just permeated with gender symbolism, gender connotations, implications, valorizations that we typically don't think about. Right? But feminists began to realize, ooh, it's not just the structural, institutional, practical aspects, it's having to change what's in our heads, not least in the academy, and probably with some of the greatest resistance in the academy. Right? So I understand gender is not male-female relations exclusively, but masculinity and femininity is a code. It's a bunch of baggage in our heads. The problem with it, well, there are many problems with it, but the key problem with it is that it privileges and valorizes those things associated with masculinity over, at the expense of those things that are actually devalued as reflecting some version of feminine or femininity. One could say a lot more about that, but let me just say that the gender as a code is what I will be referring to in my remarks. Because gender is something that permeates our bodies, our representations, our symbols, our divisions of labor, our politics, our economics, etc., it is pervasive, and to study it means what? You can't just stay in a discipline. So feminists have been exploring transdisciplinary work. That's one of the ways I would say it is cutting edge, that it's always had to be, and in many ways has invited transdisciplinary inquiry. Right? It also engages more complexity of issues because it knows that the personal is political. That was one of its initial tropes, the personal is political, which is actually very transformative if you think about it. And feminists have been working on making that transformation happen. So it challenges boundaries, both in transdisciplinarity and within the discipline of international relations. It challenged boundaries. That's where it became unpopular. Yeah? Right? Both in terms of not subscribing to levels of analysis in the conventional format, not subscribing to the kind of dichotomies or binaries that really do conventionally structure the baggage in our heads about the field, whether the assumption that politics can be separated from economics, that the national can be separated from the international, from the domestic. Feminists have been challenging all of those. So it's always been more exploratory, having to be more innovative, right? Exposed to more ways of thinking about things. If you're doing transdisciplinary or multidisciplinary work, then you're exposed to different questions, different methods, different issues, different debates, different challenges than if you just stay within a discipline. So in those senses, I would argue that feminist IR is cutting edge as well. In responding to that, feminists are almost necessarily, inevitably compelled to generate analyses, right, that are more complex, more complicated, less satisfying. They can be very frustrating, because it's hard to come up with a single, simple answer because there aren't any. Right? So it can be frustrating, but it is actually very exciting, and I would argue that it is where we need to be as scholars. Right? Really engaging the complexity and the diversity and the complications of engaging transdisciplinary, multi-level, multidimensional work. So there are examples I could raise from feminist IR, but I think I should just keep going. It also engages in real substantial foundational critiques that, again, make it somewhat unpopular because we all kind of resist having to change things we've so taken for granted, and feminism is really very much involved in that kind of challenge. Feminist IR, feminist, I would say, analytical inquiry altogether, but especially feminist IR, has been pioneering in issues of taking things like identity seriously. I don't know what SIS is teaching these days, but in general, I don't see international relations engaging issues of identity, of race, of religion or spiritual commitments, of how people care about things, and those emotional investments make a difference in what they do. Right? That in an objectivist science, a positivist mindset, particular methodologies, we just set aside what people care about, what they're willing to kill and die for. Feminists are on to that. It doesn't mean that they've resolved those questions or figured out how to analyze them, but they at least know this is something we have to deal with, how international relations could have avoided. I mean, it's caught up a bit with rationalist constructivism, right? It's getting better. But as a field that actually involves such intense emotion, right? Killing and being willing to die for it, that's intense. Right? And yet, we have hesitated, avoided, or simply not felt comfortable dealing with that. Feminists have pushed us there. They have led a lot of the efforts, pioneered in regard to subjectivity, identity, emotional investments. Example, like understanding nationalism. Right? Okay. I also argue that it's not just that feminists are cutting edge analytically, which a lot of critical, and I would argue posty type thinkers in the academy are cutting edge in that fashion, you know, exploring, asking bigger, harder, deeper, more complex questions. But feminists are also cutting edge politically. You don't claim yourself a feminist if you aren't already saying something about it. I think there needs to be some change made here. So it already acknowledges, takes some responsibility for political, practical effects of the knowledge production. It's not just, I started saying mental masturbation, but I guess I probably shouldn't say that. It's not just so much just intellectual air-blowing inquiry, but an engagement with the world we live in, and an effort to make sense of it in ways that we can actually change it. Okay? So, feminists are compelled, first because any movement that is critical of the status quo has to be political. Otherwise, it can't survive in what is kind of by definition a hostile, often quite, we'll just say resistant environment. Right? So we don't have much choice about being political in the sense of having to be strategic, having to think about what are the trade-offs, and I would point out in this environment, in this particular setting, that there should be more credit given, not just to feminists, but to all critical scholars, for the additional effort and work and courage and fortitude it takes to carry on in that road. It means you've got to constantly defend your subject, right? You've got to defend what you're studying, which, you know, if you're just going along with the mainstream, you don't have to do that, right? You've got to defend the variation, the change, the complexity of your methods, right? The challenge that you're presenting. You have to spend a lot more time doing that, which reduces the time you've got for doing all those other things that you have to also do to either get a job, graduate, get tenure, that kind of thing. So there are additional burdens for scholars who are engaged in critical work that I think ought to be acknowledged. Right? It also has to be acknowledged for grad students going into this and the kind of trade-offs you'll be asked to make, and just as a candid remark about what you're getting into. Okay. One of the other ways in which feminist theory, feminist international relations is political as well as analytically cutting edge, is that the diversity among women, and Anne mentioned that feminist comes out of practice, really, in activism, right? And that makes a real difference in the kind of questions it asks and the commitments it's engaged in. The diversity among women, right off the get-go, became a challenge for feminists, trying to, analyze this stuff and set these things in conventional categories, like we have women, and then there's these women who say, well, I don't know, I'm queer, I'm a person of color, I'm not sure you're talking about my woman, okay? Fair enough, but what to do with it? So, feminists have been struggling with that, but I would say that compared to any other left critical movement, we actually tackle it and try to do something about it, and just saying oh, well, we're just going to keep going straight ahead. Some do, of course, okay? And sometimes you feel like you don't have energy to do anything else. But compared to other critical movements, I'd say feminists are really trying hard to walk their talk. I have a leaky eye, I'm not crying yet. I might, but you'll know it'll be both. So, this diversity among women, the challenges in the development of feminist theory practice have forced us to ask different questions than just being able to assume we know what our unit of analysis is, okay, or who the agents are, or even what we're really fighting for. So this analytical and political merging, blending of feminisms in international relations, I contend, is a great part of why it is so cutting edge and so exciting and so important and relevant. To summarize, what's cutting edge about it? It's transdisciplinary, it's multi-level, it's complex, it takes into attention a number of different things, and it has pioneered research, consciousness, awareness, critique, scholarship, practice in relation to racism, sexism, queer politics, post-colonial politics, intersectionality, a variety of things that I regret to say my dearly beloved discipline of international relations still has a long way to go. Hence, the feminist IR, I believe, is the cutting edge of international relations. I don't know of any. There are many other values and contributions of other subfields. There are many strong and powerful qualities to conventional mainstream work, but if you're asking for relevant, exciting, cutting-edge material, this is it.
I didn't say
And this is it, all right? So, cutting to an example of exactly what I mean by cutting-edge feminist IR scholarship in its contribution. Christine has, as I already indicated, written the third of fabulously researched, dense, textured, marvelously sophisticated, analytically, politically, emotionally, right? Books with great titles. It's important to have a great title, and not all of us are able. In Services and Servitude in 1988, Cruising the Global Economy, I mean. It's wonderful. And then
in maritime industry.
Well, it's wonderful. Don't give it away. Okay. And today, Cosmopolitan Sex Workers. Really a marvelous piece and very much cutting edge in a variety of ways that I could name some dimensions. In this text, Christine is merging, bringing together, interacting, a variety of different areas of inquiry that just normally aren't even tackled in the same text, much less in the same body of research. Whether that's, and I want to point out how much these really are significant for conventional international relations themes. This is not out there somewhere as somebody else's lives or some small portion of the planet. Right? This is international relations. And it includes the extraordinary expansion of transnational migration. Right? This matters. Not one of the things IR is most focused on, and yet look at all the different ways it shapes everyone's lives, economically, culturally, in terms of the cultural, religious, spiritual codes that shape people's lives, that enable people to feel like it's appropriate to kill or to die for a cause. Right? These things are part of transnational migration, the ways that global households, families are reconstituted through what some of us call global householding. That's in this book as well, that members of family members, are going across national boundaries for work, for education, for health, for various phases of their life in ways that we can talk about. Households, those entities that pool resources to have some continuity over time, no longer being located in one particular place under one roof, but transnational in ways that Michael Douglas estimates that perhaps 1 in 7 people on the planet is involved in a global householding arrangement. Because of international education, because of refugee movements, because of migration, because of different retirement schemes, because of different health formations across the planet, mostly economic. There are many changes going on, and Christine's work taps into a number of them. So, global political economy, central, of course, because this is about work and the various ways in which the participants, agents in this text are engaging in transnational work, right? And how they are doing it, what it means basically within the country, what it means for this newly theorized global cities phenomenon that's part of larger global economic restructuring, so that it resituates where concentrations of particular kinds of labor are, right? In what parts of the world, what does that mean? In addition to an area that's close to my heart, because it's research I do, informal economic activities. It's completely out of the view, out of the lens of international relations mainstream. But more than half the planet is engaged in informal economic activity. We just don't pay any attention. And if you consider and include illicit black market, right, the large international networks, criminal networks in terms of bodies, drugs, nuclear weapons, arms, right? We're talking about a larger economy than possibly what we have visible, because we can't track it, so we can't really put an easy number on it. It's often when you can't put an easy number on something, isn't it? But it's always the most interesting questions around those uneasy numbers. So, really major issues for conventional IR that are part of what is covered in this book. Intercultural communications, because of these transactions that happen where you got people moving around for parts of their lives into these entirely different social and cultural environments, have effects. They have effects, I would argue, as Christine does, for international relations more generally. And Christine is cutting edge, of course, in regard to both these topics, being able to merge them in the sophisticated manner that she does, but also engaging the intersectional issues that feminists have been pioneering in regard to attending to race and class and sexualities, right, and geopolitical location as part of who we are and how that is all changing. And then finally, courage. Can you imagine writing a book like this? Sex workers? Holy shit. So, hats off. More courage than even I have. Right? I'll talk about queer, but sex work, that's, yeah. So, and not only is it the courage to tackle these issues, but to do it so effectively and professionally, and to somehow be able to avoid, to walk this very delicate line between those who are just wholly horrified by sex work, okay, and those who are doing work that happens to involve sensuality and sexualities. Okay? That is a remarkable achievement, and certainly the sign of a very mature scholar, and I would say a very brave woman. Okay, I want to get to how things are cut. That feminist IR, for all these wonderful things I've said about it, is cutting edge. It is also cut. How do we make sense of that? What do we do about it? And very briefly, because I am aware of time, right? The strengths are precisely why it's cut. It's complicated, it's cross-disciplinary, it challenges fundamental methods, right? It challenges most of the conventional assumptions of the field about what topics matter, about what we should be studying, how we should be studying, right? That is threatening in a variety of ways. It is feminist. That is threatening in ways that we have yet to deal with. Marxists may have a struggle in economics. Environmentalists may have a struggle in the world more generally. There are many struggles to be had, but an additional feature of feminist struggles is that consciously or unconsciously, we sense, shit, this is going to matter in the bedroom. We can't just keep this out there, a little talky-talky about why men fight wars. Okay? Sooner or later, it's going to come up in the bedroom and the bathroom. It's already in the kitchen. Okay? So, there is resistance to a revolutionary movement, because it would be a revolution to actually secure something called gender equality. I would like to call it post-genderism, but I'd go for gender equality, except for starters. Okay? So there's all those reasons for resistance that are personal, not the bedroom and bathroom, okay, and professional. People are invested in their careers, their scholarship, the methods that they're familiar with, they're comfortable with. It sounds good, works to me, I can count it. Yeah? Well, so the resistance is considerable and is played out rather dramatically pretty much across the board. There are no feminist IR positions at Research One universities in this country. I don't have a feminist IR position. A lot of the foremost feminist IR scholars are in other units. Right? What do they decide to do? Leave the discipline behind. Go where I can get on with my research. I don't have to defend why I'm doing this research, but I can get on with it. So, by being so hostile to cutting-edge feminism, the discipline is precluding students who want to engage these topics. They'll go elsewhere if they've been smart enough to figure out it's not a hospitable place for any kind of feminist critical work. Okay? Scholars, graduates, will go elsewhere for a job because they aren't in this country. You can tweak it in a variety of ways, and so there are jobs. I don't mean to say there's no jobs for anybody who does feminist IR. I wouldn't want to say that. Right? But the United States especially is quite hostile professionally to the actual explicit pursuit of feminist international relations scholarship. UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, much better. Programs, graduate programs, gender, feminist IR. Positions, explicitly, we're looking for someone who does feminist IR. You have to go a ways to find that here. So I need to cut. So I think that there is a real loss to the discipline, right, by the failure to recognize feminism as cutting edge and what it has to offer and what we could learn from it, and presumably offer to it as well, because it's not good to just be, as we know in Washington, it's not good to just be polarized and nobody's talking to anybody else. Right? I would encourage us to try to do something about IR. Some feminists just leave it and ask, if you will, IR questions in feminism rather than feminist questions in IR. I prefer not to leave it. I hope I can encourage that choice today. I believe that IR needs feminism, in part because working within IR does make a difference, however small and inadequate it seems at moments. It does make a difference to have programs, courses, speakers, fabulous professors, scholarship. It makes a difference, and I don't want to quit having that difference made. It also helps IR enrich its analyses. It's obvious I'm not real impressed with mainstream IR for its relevance or its power, its strength in actually making sense of the world we live in. It's a very complicated, dynamic world, and it doesn't seem to me that IR is stepping to the line that as a discipline it has a responsibility to meet. Where else, if you were looking for a discipline to help answer or at least guide or inform the biggest questions on the planet today, where else would you go? Psychology? Right? Art? All of these can contribute, but international relations claims to address these issues. And yet I would tentatively suggest that it doesn't do as well as it might, and that certainly I think it would do better if it took advantage of the rich analytical and political resources that feminists bring to IR. In conclusion, what to do? You should support feminist IR. And you should support it here and everywhere else you are, right? And not least because, as Anne's comments suggested, this merger of theory and practice, feminists are into this. We have a lot of resources to bring to that issue. And as Anne indicated, the policy people are on it. I don't know that they're doing it completely and systematically and effectively. We don't have a revolution yet. But they know that it is real, that it is something to be dealt with. They desire more input from the academy, some theoretical, some inspiration, some knowledge about that can be brought to the policy world. What better place to cultivate such scholarship and such inquiry than right here in the School of International Service? I'm done.
Wow. Thank you, Spike, for that very refreshing presentation and for your courage as well. We'll take your lead. I'm not going to introduce Christine as such. Everybody knows Christine. She's an administrator, a teacher, a professor, and a teacher and a researcher. And she has, this is the third book, and it's wonderful how she has built one on top of the other. And from coming from the households, the first book, to the ocean in a cruise ship, and now to the city, the global city, cosmopolitanism, and sex work. In fact, Christine and I shouldn't be talking to each other, because in the spectrum, I have a book on sex work, and she has a book on sex work. I have a book on sex trafficking. So normally those scholars don't speak to each other. But I'm very happy to speak to Christine, and we learn from each other. And Christine, it's now up to you to talk about your book and tell us how good it is.
Thank you. Note to self, don't ever come after Spike. Thank you so much for taking, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Thank you so much for taking the time to spend the afternoon with us. I just want to thank a few people, my former students, alumni who've come home. Welcome back. Welcome back, Spike. Thank you to my colleagues in SIS and across campus who are here. Thank you to some external guests, even undergrad students who are in the audience. I really don't know how to follow up after Spike. But I have to say the one person who's made the trek down from New York to be with us, my editor at Oxford, Angela Konepko, who's right there. If you're in the market for a professional, the consummate editor, that's Angela. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. She marshaled the book from proposal manuscript to production professionally. Supportive, always had a critical eye for stuff. This book would not be here today if not for Angela and if not for Anne, who, talk about courage and not wanting to defend one's work, and just kept saying, are you going to do it? Are you going to do it? And here it is. So how am I going to talk about my book? Let me introduce you to three individuals. Margaret, Nigerian woman in her 20s, born in Lagos, born into a large family of boys and girls. And in that particular family, boys, they pool their resources to send boys to school so that they can make names and lives for themselves to take care of their families. Girls, however, were either left at home to help with the housework or sent out to be domestic workers. Margaret refused. She rejected domestic work. So she decided with her friends to engage in some petty trading and sex work on the side. Not a few months into sex work in Lagos, she came to the realization that if her family found out that that was what she did, that she would bring shame upon them. So she left with her family to Joburg. And in Joburg, she worked in a brothel that serviced clients are mainly truck drivers. Truck drivers refused to use condoms. So she left with some of her friends to Cape Town. Cape Town, they worked for a woman, ran a brothel, servicing international clientele. There she met a Malaysian executive on business. He put her in touch with a syndicate. To cut a long story short, she ended up in Kuala Lumpur. Margaret's goal is to save money from sex work so that she can eventually go home to Lagos to set up a school for girls, to do what she had been denied. And then there's a young woman, university graduate, her name is Roland, pseudonyms. BA in communication from a university in Shanghai. As an undergraduate, she traveled to Asia on budget airlines. $50 would take you from Shanghai to Kuala Lumpur, right? $99 could take you from Shanghai to Sydney. So they traveled the region, built up their social networks, and upon graduation, she worked hard to get a job. The best job that she could land was that of as a clerk in an office. And she said she worked really, really hard, but she just couldn't land a good job with decent pay. So she met some Malaysian executives in the nightclub scene in Shanghai. Some of them put her in touch with a syndicate. From Kuala Lumpur, from Shanghai, she's traveled to Kuala Lumpur, Sydney, Auckland, Singapore to perform sex work. Her goal is to save enough money so that she can eventually pay for her own graduate education. Wants a career in media. And then this captain, I call him captain. Husband and father of 2 young girls. Captain works for a syndicate or facilitating group specializing in non-trafficked women sex workers. I call that group Syndicate X. Syndicate X has 4 divisions. One is called investment. The principal in charge of that particular division, his sole responsibility is to source new investments, commercial retail properties in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, throughout the region, internationally. And then there's another division called, I call it, human resources. And that division is in charge of employees in all of their commercial retail businesses. Third division, I call it miscellaneous. That division is in charge of securing, arranging for women's travel into and out of Kuala Lumpur, travel documents, visas, board and lodging, transportation, and their journeys forward to different cities. Captain's division is called security legal. His division is in charge of arranging for women's release from detention and wiping their records clean. They're also in charge of, Captain and his colleagues are also in charge of women's personal security. So Syndicate X emerged in the early 1990s, and I'll give you a quote, and this captures what they do. Quote, "They, as in the government, they give us 5-star hotels, we must give them 5-star women." So the lives of, and it's not just 5-star women per se. Syndicate X is not in it just to make a profit. Syndicate X actually, in its recruitment and employment of migrant women, has helped construct and naturalize a hierarchy of sex workers. At the very top, the top tiers, are women who phenotypically or physiognomically resemble white women. right? Russian women, Eastern European women, Central Asian women. And you go down in terms of shades of color. Black African women, however, are not at the bottom of this hierarchy. In Kuala Lumpur, they occupy a very special niche. They cater to what syndicate members call VIPs, very important persons. So you can imagine captains of industries, government, right? The lives of these three individuals, and many more in the book, they don't know each other. The majority of them don't know each other, but their lives and livelihoods are intertwined in this world-class city called Kuala Lumpur, or KL. So I'd like to make three major points from the findings in the book. One is that commercial sex work that is increasingly being performed by transnational migrant women is now globalized by way of an interconnected web of global or world cities. So if you imagine a map of the world, and you put pins on every major city in the different regions. These cities are connected, metaphorically, by highways, land, air, and sea. Some of these highways also, highways for the movement of goods, services, information. Some of these highways also serve as migratory pathways for corporate executives, for academics, for international tourists, students, and of course, temporary guest workers or contract workers, men and women. Syndicate Captain's Syndicate, Syndicate X, draws on these migratory pathways to bring women in and out of Asia. They specialize in what is called the Asian circuit of sex work, linking the cities of Kuala Lumpur, Singapore, Jakarta sometimes, Tokyo, Taipei, Sydney, and Auckland. And when the women are done with the Asian circuit, they'll move on to a different circuit. Margaret, who works for another syndicate, came in on a tourist visa. Roland, our university graduate from Shanghai, entered also on a tourist visa. I think Margaret came in on a student visa. It's called a 6+1, 6 months plus a year. That gives them 18 months of uninterrupted stay, where women can combine sex work with pursuing a kind of certificate program, some kind of education. And as I said, in the global city of Kuala Lumpur, it's very specific, contextualized hierarchy of sex workers. In Dubai, for example, white women, European women at the top of the hierarchy, and black women are at the bottom. In Geneva, it's very different. African women specialize in sex work emanating from champagne bars. Asian women work out of massage parlors, and other nationalities of women work out of certain kinds of commercial spaces. So different global cities have different kinds of hierarchies of sex work. My second point is that sex work, based on the interviews of the women for this study, sex work is not the job of last resort. Sex work has become a means to some end. For the majority of the women in this study, they have combined what I call the familial imperative, that is helping family members, brothers' education, paying for health bills. They've combined that with the opportunities to seek an education, to earn money, to eventually set up businesses, to buy land, and for some, the ability to consume luxury items. I call it not just many studies of sex trafficking or sex workers focus on their participation in the industry as a form of survival strategy, but for the women in this study, I would call it a life enhancement strategy. And they see sex work as work. For example, Ndidi, an African sex worker, she says that prostitutes are workers. I, as in Ndidi, work with my body. You, as in Christine, work with your mind. And then there's Alice, a former sex worker, a former Malaysian sex worker who's now become a mommy to the migrant women. Mommies who work for syndicates are in charge of helping women or guide women as to how to comport themselves, carry themselves, what to wear, what not to wear. Alice says, and let me read you the quote. To be a woman is a curse. So everyone has to make do with what they can in this life. And then there's Jing Hua, another sex worker from China. She says, what's wrong with being a miss? And that's euphemistic for women who engage in sex work. What's wrong with being a miss? We work hard for our money, and we do so with dignity. So for them, it doesn't matter what I think. For them, sex work is considered work. My third point is that a lot of studies on sex trafficking, sex work, focus on the supply side. That is, why do women engage in prostitution? What this book does is to use an economistic term, bring in the demand side. And instead of asking the question, why do men buy sex? There are lots of empirical studies on why men buy sex, and there's no one major reason. I do something else. The question I ask is, what are the structural forces at work that encourage the globalization of commercial sex work? And this is where syndicates or facilitating groups come in. Now, Syndicate X is one of 8 very large facilitating groups in KL. There are medium-sized and small ones. And what these syndicates, they are one-stop shops. They take care of recruiting women, their travel documents. When women enter a global city, they take care of board and lodging, personal security, clients, and the women's forward journey. So what these syndicates do in Asia, whether it's in Kuala Lumpur or Singapore or Shanghai or Sydney, is that they give order to a global sex frontier. And if you think about global cities as these nodes, interconnected nodes, as women move from city to city, say, for example, an African woman who ends up in Doha or Dubai, where the majority of Black African women are at the bottom tier. By the time they get to Kuala Lumpur, they're considered special. And what they're able to command in terms of fees, wages, is, I offer detailed breakdowns in the book. Some women at the very top tier clear at least 10, 15, 20,000 a month US dollars pre-tax. When I talk about tax, I'm talking about syndicate tax. The syndicates in Kuala Lumpur at least, there's a 40% tax on their income. So even after a 40% tax on their income, the women clear at least 11, 12,000 US dollars per month. So when I ask the women, why would you do sex work? The majority of them came back with this. It is the best option amongst a limited range of opportunities open to us. Why would we, if we have more control over our work conditions and environment, if we earn more, why would we want to be a live-in domestic worker, a restaurant server, or somebody who works 16 hours on a factory assembly line? Let me just, and Vidya hasn't shown me that time up slip, but I'm going to be good. Let me just end by saying that what the book does is to show how women's transnational migration for sex work, it's not an anomaly. To look at it from the lens of criminality and illegality is to miss a large, complex picture of how this particular phenomenon is structurally embedded in the new global economy. let me end here and take your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine, for that. And just aside, I was walking down the corridor hallway today, and I said, students said, "Oh, it's a big event today, Professor Samra Singh." I said, "Yes," and she said, "Oh, it's on this book, Professor Chin, Professor of Sex Work." I said, "No. She's not the professor of sex work. She's a professor who researches on sex work." So anyway, so you have to live down that. So we are open for questions, and you can address them to either Christine or to Spike. So go ahead. To Anne as well, not to me. Yeah. Could you please say your name and then, yeah, just over. Yeah. My name? Oh, Kathy, please. Yeah. Somebody needs to take this.
All right, Kathy Schneider. Fascinating story. So I have a couple questions. One is, how did you manage to do this work? I mean, how did you get access to these syndicates, get them to talk to you? How did they let you talk to women involved? How did you actually do this? And I guess, my experience with sex workers in New York is really different. Because in New York, the women, we used to work with sex workers through Fringe Exchange. And almost all of those women had these really tragic stories that got them into drugs first and sex work to support their drug habits. A lot were, throwaway kids, incest victims, etc. So, and they didn't know how to get out of it. Do these women who have these ambitions actually manage to move from sex work into opening their shops, getting their graduate degrees, or is that just like, what they wish for?
Let me answer your second question first before I go back to your first question. Yes, according to the mommies who stay in touch with some of the women, they are able to do that. And what I didn't talk about in my brief remarks, and this goes to show how the formal and informal economies are really intimately intertwined, and there's no separating them. I'll rephrase your question by saying, I'll rephrase your question. Given the amount of money that women earn, how do they get it out of the country? Right? And this is what was mind-blowing for me. I'll explain it this way. Assuming that I'm the one who's just made my $11,000, and Spike is a syndicate member. So I never touch physical cash. She just keeps records. Then she'll say at the end of the month, what would you like to do with it? I'll say, well, I want it remitted back home, wherever home is. Okay, it could be Tashkent, it could be Moscow. So Spike then gives me a bank account number, local bank. I don't get to open a bank account because I'm a tourist or I'm a student, whatnot. So she gives me the bank account number. She writes me a check, right? Or it could be cash. I take it to the bank. I bank it in. I take the deposit slip. I give it to Spike. Spike then gives it to what is called a money changer. Now, for those of you who've been to major cities in the world, money changers are just these storefronts, right? Well, not all money changers do this job. You only know them if you've had, it's hidden. So Spike then takes it to her preferred money changer, who then texts or fax the amount, right, after conversion, overseas to a bank in Tashkent. That person then takes that amount, the equivalent after exchange, gives it to the woman's representative or somebody, takes that withdrawal slip, right, faxes it back to Spike, and Spike shows it to me, and that's how money moves. And according to the syndicates, it's not just done for migrant women to remit migrant women's earnings. Corporations take advantage of this. And this is not new in the sense that central banks are aware of this. It's just that in Asia, many of the banks don't practice what is called a KYC policy, know your customer. In this country, I don't know if it holds that it's $9,999 that flags IRS, right? Even if you put an amount of $9,999 that would flag something, well, then it'd be 9,000 or 6,000. My answer to your first question, I'll link it to what Spike said earlier about having courage and needing to defend what we're studying. I did not want to pursue this project. Would you believe me if I told you that the book wrote itself, despite my resistance? And I didn't. I'm now able to speak about why I didn't. For the longest time, I told myself that, you know, I was scared. And I had specific reason to be scared. I wasn't scared of doing the field work itself. What scared me, and it scared me tremendously, was the vociferous debates between abolitionists and sex work. Opposing perspectives. I was scared because I found the debates, now both sides made very legitimate points. Very legitimate. There is a phenomenon of sex trafficked women, as there is the phenomena of sex workers. But the way in which the debates were cast, they scared me because they left me feeling very, very oppressed. I found the debates way too rigid, that both sides drill down into the details, right? If we think about it metaphorically, you're standing there, you're looking at the shape of each tree, how the leaves are, whether a tree is tall, is wide, but here's the fact that the different trees that get argued over are part of a larger forest. Until I made that connection about the global economic restructuring, that broader context, I was not going to get into the study. Because it had become so entrenched, the either-or perspective, that whichever one I ended up, my field material told me to end up arguing for, I would have had to betray the other side, right? And for a scholar, there's nothing worse than when you feel that your primary mission to generate and recover knowledge gets compromised in this way. Now, that still doesn't answer your question. How did I get access to syndicates? When I look back at the genealogy of my work, this book could not have been written without the first two. In the sense that contexts that were built out in the field years and years and years ago, they were the ones, even as I worked on my second book, Cruising in the Global Economy, the field work was enthralling. The field work took place in Kuala Lumpur, in Los Angeles, in Baltimore, in Newark, in New York. There's nothing better for an academic, a scholar, than when you can go on cargo ships and cruise ships, roll on, roll off. It's a completely different world. But the context that I had made out in the field knew me as they knew some of the syndicate members, and apparently a lot of vetting had taken place. Their vetting of me, I have nothing to hide, I don't, you know. They needed to make sure that I was not part of immigration, needed to make sure that I was not an informant for the police. The first book on migrant domestic workers, the context, the informants, the relationships that I built out in the field, I sustained over the years. That's what made it possible. Now, the syndicate that of all the projects that I've done, this has been the most painful, given what I said about courage and not wanting to defend what I was studying. But it was the most exhilarating, most mind-blowing, and most mind-numbing at the same time, because I had to confront my own assumptions of, one, who are prostitutes? Why would women, if given options, do this? Well, the questions themselves betray something. That the questions betray the belief that women, as risk managers, must and are expected to behave morally and responsibly in the face of disadvantage. And hence, we make those judgments, right? So that's one. Second assumption that got shattered, when we think about the sex sector or the sex industry, we think of it as seedy, dark places. It's not that they don't happen in seedy, dark places, but this was all out in the open, right? The moment the Malaysian state decided to clamp down on street prostitution, it drove everything indoors. So now you have budget hotels, 5-6-star hotels, luxury spas, luxury condominiums, mansions, housing estates. These are all spaces that have been sexualized. Right? So what was mind-blowing and mind-numbing for me at the very same time is that it was right out in front of me. And the only time when I really fully realized that was when I put on a different set of lenses. And that migration for sex work is becoming pedestrian. It's part of everyday life. Now, it's paradoxical in the sense that, oh, look at global discourse on anti-sex trafficking and how we have to save women. Yeah, I'm not rejecting that, but I'm saying there's something else that this global anti-sex trafficking discourse has obscured. What is happening in everyday life? And let me link it back to international political economy. Part of the value, I'm not comfortable with tooting my own horn, but I now understand how and why the book wrote itself. There is a movement in international political economy that is calling for an ontological shift, right? If we just define IPE as the distribution, management, and contestation over material and symbolic resources, right? And hence the major actors are states, firms, and organizations. What some other folks have called the upper circuits of capital that drive globalization. They're important. Not so coincidentally, the global talent, the people who go all around the world plying their trade, just so happen to be men. 99%. Right? So that leaves the lower circuits of capital occupied by domestic workers, restaurant workers, right? Men and women who do 3D work, dangerous, degrading, and dangerous, degrading, dirty. That still leaves women as, okay, this is important, this is what drives globalization, but this other stuff, yeah, we'll attend to it because, domestic workers need rights, we'll have to fight for them. Feminists have done that, we've said it for 20 years. Sex work, when it comes in only under the lens of criminality and illegality, as if it is completely divorced from the upper circuits of capital, from trade, finance, investments, all the important stuff, right? So the movement within IPE is called everyday IPE, right? Let's look at how everyday people in their lives, their actions contribute to challenge, modify, affirm global transformation. But guess what? Let me link it back to Spike. When I first read Hobson and Seabrook's book on everyday IPE, I put it down and I said, well, feminists have been doing this for 20, 30 years. It has been about everyday life. factory workers, sex workers, all kinds of workers, right? And this goes back to Anne and Spike's point about what questions do we ask in feminist IR? And why is it that we have been so sidelined? Part of it has to do with the power of these binary distinctions, public, private, right? Production, reproduction. State, market. What is important and what is not important? I'll just end right there.
Okay, we don't have much time for perhaps one or two questions. One more question. Yeah, one more question over here. Yeah. Just one more question. We have to. Yeah.
I just want to know how it seemed like this market of sex worker is such as like a big market because it's connected from one city to another city to another city. It's kind of like play role in like the government of each city, kind of like because you're saying that in each airport there's someone waiting for the woman to prepare for their security. So it means that in somewhat the government have to be some knowledge into this problem. And so how is this connection, like how you found out?
Absolutely. Police, immigration, different state agencies, consulates, travel agencies, hotels, taxi drivers, they're all part of the network.
Okay, we have to close now because we need to get, but before I do that, I want to make some closing remarks. Thank you very much for this fabulous panel.